Hello, I'm Melanie Murcott, and I'm an associate professor at the Institute of Marine and Environmental Law at the University of Cape Town. And I'm working on a project on the SDGs and their relevance in a time of climate change, together with Matteo Famiglia, who is a voluntary scientific fellow at Hasselt University in Belgium, as well as an assistant professor of climate law and governance at the University of Amsterdam in their Faculty of Humanities. Matteo and I are looking at how the UN Sustainable Development Goals work, specifically with reference to how governance actors in Europe and Africa are playing a role in implementing the SDGs, either deliberately or inadvertently, including actors such as the courts, municipalities, international bodies, and corporations. Our aim is to foster North-South dialogue among lawyers, policymakers, and academics, and everyone else on the significance of the SDGs as governance tools in a time of climate crisis. We want to generate innovative responses to climate change and its many human rights implications. Now, we're doing this with thanks to the Flemish Inter-University Council UOS program through Hasselt University in Belgium, which supports partnerships between Flemish universities and universities in the Global South, such as the University of Cape Town. Today, we're meeting with Beatriz, who will talk to us about the role of the IMO and shipping sector in implementing the SDGs in a time of climate change. Beatriz Martinez Romera is an associate professor of environmental and climate change law at the Center for Climate Change Law and Governance, University of Copenhagen in Denmark. Welcome, Beatriz.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Happy to be here with you.
Great. And we have just a few questions for you about the SDGs and the shipping sector and the IMO. Which is, of course, the International Maritime Organization. Our first question is, what is the role you see for the IMO and the shipping sector when it comes to implementing the SDGs, particularly to respond to climate change?
So the IMO and the shipping sector, the industry, they definitely have an important role to play in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. It is relevant in connection to many aspects, and in fact, in 2019, the IMO put forward a strategy for the implementation of SDGs, including a framework for future work of the IMO Secretariat to support the 2030 agenda. And they created this diagram when basically they saw themselves contributing or helping members of the IMO to contribute to basically all of the goals. Now, with regards to climate change, there is a crucial moment now, and there's really a big role that the IMO and the shipping sector can play to implement these Sustainable Development Goals. And that has to do with the adoption in 2023, last July, of a revised strategy for greenhouse gas emissions for international shipping, and that will include the deployment of market-based measures of some type and a fuel measure as well that will be contributing directly to environmental protection, Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate action, but also Sustainable Development Goal 14, life below water. And I think these developments will gain only more traction now with the advisory opinion of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, which also mentioned IMO and MARPOL as flag states and the industry as actors that are relevant for climate change action. Then, of course, the measure that will be adopted at the IMO will include somehow the promotion of cleaner technologies and fuels. And in that connection, that will also relate to Sustainable Development Goal number 7 on affordable and clean energy. And in fact, the sector is regarded as many as will act as a catalyzer for development of certain fuels, which might also have a spillover effect on other sectors of society. So they will encourage innovation and design of ships and technology, and that also links to Sustainable Development Goal number 9 on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So that's also a very important one, which in turn could lead to economic growth if we manage to create a greener society and economy, and that also connect to a certain extent to Sustainable Development Aid on decent work and economic growth. Beyond that, we can think about Sustainable Development Goals that deal with more, let's say, governance items like the ones you were mentioning on your introduction. So Sustainable Development 16 on strong institutions, for example, there the IMO will play a big role in promoting basically strong institutional governance within the maritime industry. So fostering cooperation and international law. Then also we have seen in the last years an uprise on collaborations between private sector and stakeholders towards sustainable shipping. And in that way, the IMO can also contribute to Sustainable Development Goal 17, which is partnerships for the goals.
Great, thank you. It's quite clear that the IMO and the shipping sector have a huge role to play in implementing the SDGs, and that they are doing so quite intentionally. The next question that we have really relates to whether or not the SDGs are central to the shipping sector and the IMO, and play a role in governing them centrally, or whether there's a governance tool that comes in more peripherally or tangentially into what the IMO and the shipping sector does. We also wonder, and I think this has come through a little bit already, but to what extent do the shipping sector and the IMO intentionally or deliberately implement the SDGs, or does this really happen by accident? I hear you saying there's a lot of quite intentional action towards the implementation of the SDGs in your previous answer. So maybe you could reflect on some of the unintended ways in which the SDGs are implemented by either the IMO or the shipping sector.
So I think my first point would be that the IMO as a UN specialized agency was created in 1948 through the IMO Convention, and basically was not initially created to achieve sustainable transport. This is something that has come later into the IMO objectives, so to speak. So probably fostering trade and ensuring that that was done in a safe manner and environmentally sound manner was already from the beginning of the inception of this institution, but sustainable shipping has been incorporated later or over time. And the truth is, like, the IMO has dealt with many environmental problems and has a set of environmental regimes around it. So in that way, you can say, we can say that sustainability is part of it. Probably the understanding of sustainable development changed notably after after 2015, when Sustainable Development Goals were adopted. And in fact, after that, the IMO developed certain reports and a strategy in 2019 where they basically look into specifically how they could incorporate that. In particular, they have worked, or they have fostered more action towards Sustainable Development Goal 14, 13, 9, and 17. So life underwater, below water, sorry, climate change, the partnerships, but also gender equality. Sustainable Development number 5 plays an important role in organizations. So you can see that through different reports, and probably more on the soft law side of things. So in that way, it's present and it serves as a direction, let's say, for the organization to move towards that. As for the industry, I suppose that varies a lot depending on what companies and what actors you're looking into, but I would say many shipping companies are incorporating as well Sustainable Development Goals into their work to a certain extent. So it would be really, I think it's deliberate to basically put this at the center of it. and probably that will be reflected on the next outcomes of the organization regarding, for example, greenhouse gas emissions.
Thanks, Beatriz. So you've already told us a lot of SDGs that are relevant to the IMO and the shipping sector, but could you tell us a little bit more about any SDGs that are particularly relevant and why?
So I think right now for the organization, as I was saying, the one on climate action, so Sustainable Development Goal 13 is very important. The impact that greenhouse gas emissions have on marine environment, sea level rise, and other items is really strong. So it's really an important thing. Beyond that, of course, the energy transition and the whole reform that will need to happen with regards to infrastructure, I think that's also very relevant. And the IMO could help members to foster innovation and infrastructure, ports, making fuel available. So that is also important. And then in general, try to create an area where different stakeholders can move forward with this energy transition that shipping needs to undertake in a manner that is also fair and equitable for everyone. So this is very important because, of course, shipping contributes around 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And although it is often highlighted that it transports a lot of the world trade, around 80%, is a sector, is really the last sector of the economy that is moving towards addressing the greenhouse gas emissions, its impact on climate change. There's been some kind of measures on efficiency and operational measures, but really the big thing is how they're going to get to net zero by or around 2050, which is what they have agreed on the 2023 revised strategy. So there's a lot of focus and many eyes on what the IMO is going to do in the industry is going to do in the next years.
Thank you. And just in layman's terms, if I understand you correctly, the reason why these SDGs are so important is because the shipping sector is quite harmful to the marine environment and the climate system, because there's a great deal of emissions and also a considerable amount of marine pollution from the shipping sector.
Yeah, I would say that some of the pollution has been already addressed. The sulfur regulation, for example, regulation on ballast water, regulation on noise. So there's been advancement, but it's really climate change is the remaining item. Then we can think about climate-related impacts of shipping that are not about greenhouse gas emissions, as for example, the issue of black carbon in the Arctic. But so this is I will say this is the main agenda item in terms of environmental impacts of shipping that the international community need to address, and it's long due because other sectors such as aviation, for example, already have some instruments in place which we can argue are ambitious enough or not, but it's really the time for shipping to move ahead.
Great, and that positions the SDGs as capable of playing some policy for, reform role for the shipping sector, hopefully.
Yeah, I don't think that an instrument adopted under the, basically, it will be MARPOL Annex 6 that will include whatever measure is decided, or that what seems to be the most visible option at present. I don't think maybe the Sustainable Development Goals are going to be mentioned there, so it will not be on that way. I don't think so, but it will be indeed guiding the organization towards a goal, the same way that the goals are doing with every country for their matters. No? It's a guiding political aim or objective, and it's a principle almost.
So it's an illustration of the SDGs playing a peripheral role in governance towards climate action.
yeah, and at the same time, very important because really sustainable shipping, sustainable fuels, sustainable development, those are the terms and the narratives that are behind. It's difficult as lawyers to maybe separate the law from what actually matters, but this is, they are indeed relevant.
Brilliant, thank you. And then, legally speaking, this moves nicely into our next question. The SDGs, as we know, are soft law in the sense that they're non-binding but inform policy development and implementation. In contrast, hard laws impose binding obligations. As far as the IMO and shipping sector are concerned, could the SDGs begin to play a hard law role, or do you see them limited to playing a soft law role?
I think they will stay most probably on the soft side of things. It's true that maybe they could be incorporated into treaties or some of the strategies at the IMO, which are not binding in the way of a treaty, they could also incorporate them. But I mean, creation of a new binding instrument under the IMO on this, I don't think will really happen. And then we need to think as well that it has to have a purpose. So right now, it seems like there's certain consensus among member states to move towards this the regulation of greenhouse gas emissions, and then probably that is good. It might not add so much value to the discussion as such, but it's a nice thing that is on the, you know, underpinning basically the reason why we're doing this.
Brilliant. Thanks. And then our last question for you, and it's really evident for me in the conversation we're having, but I think our listeners would like to know, what is the value of North-South dialogue when it comes to engaging on the implementation of the SDGs? Of course, you're positioned in the global North as a scholar at Copenhagen, and I'm sitting here in the global South as a scholar at the University of Cape Town. And I can honestly say that I've learned so much from dialoguing with you already. But what do you think is the value from your point of view?
So any transition happening right now with regards to climate change in the IMO for international shipping will have to encompass the needs and the interest of many actors, state actors. And that includes things such as there will be countries, and I'm not sure it's the traditional North-South divide here because shipping operates in a little bit of a different manner. There are remote places, least developed countries, so there's maybe a different dynamic. But indeed, issues such as capacity building, making resources available, technical assistance as well, and incorporating some kind of way through which less developed countries or developing countries can actually join the energy transition that they need to do in shipping. So this is a dialogue that needs to happen between the needs of different countries and how can we actually help everybody to move ahead on this transition in a manner that is equitable and fair. And a lot of the talk and dialogue and scholarship in the last years is coming, you know, is around this matter. So there's definitely a lot of conversations to have there. And then probably with regards to developing and making available the fuel that is needed, certain countries, certain developing countries will have a massive role for the shipping industry. So yeah, a big need for a conversation there.
Brilliant. Thank you for your time and insights on the SDGs, Beatriz. For more information, you can check out our forthcoming book on the SDGs at work with North-South insights on how the SDGs are being implemented as governance tools amidst the climate crisis. This has been the SDGs at work.